Part 2 of What Did You Do? Part 1 down below. The money he had been paying to the non-existent security company in order to get around labor issues was not legitimate. They were prepared to overlook it in exchange for some thought, but he didn't want the union in his shop. He wasn't sure if paying the extortion was illegal, but the union representative's request was undoubtedly illegal. Ryan had never complained to the authorities because he had cooperated so much. This went well beyond that small-scale engagement with unlawful activity. Can he tolerate this? Finally, he added, it's risky. Awfully risky. He took a seat across from the couch, laid his head back, and closed his eyes to reflect. He continued, but not too risky. If we're smart and if we don't get too greedy. He pondered for a while more. How would we set up accounts to send wire transfers to? Inquired the man. Consuela swallowed and paused before responding. The remark and the subsequent inquiry revealed that Ryan had accepted the idea of punishing Carrie Gilchrist, Shawn Michaels, and the bank all at once to a greater or lesser extent. She spoke a shaky, my mother's uncle Roberto lives in Mexico City. He has an import and export company and he travels all over the Caribbean on business. He knows lots of people. Some of them have contacts. She became quieter. Her great-uncle knew people in high and low places, people he could call on who knew how to keep their lips shut, of course, but neither of them addressed the suggestion. We know the passwords, he considered, but no one knows we do. Actually, no one could reasonably expect there would be any way in the world we could know. He paused for a time. He said, well, unless my video gets shown somewhere. He glanced at Consuela as he opened his eyes. Silently, he said to her, this had better be worth me losing my revenge on my wife. She questioned, perplexed by the remark, why? You can still show the times when she was sleeping with that man. It's just the kitchen that you couldn't show anyone. She came to an end. Ryan was swaying back and forth. Nope. We can't afford the possibility someone might wonder if I had spy cameras in one place. Why wouldn't I have cameras somewhere else? See, she gave a nod. It was too obvious to be disputed. Once more, Ryan closed his eyes and rested his head back on the sofa. I purchased the cameras and all other items with cash, he remarked thoughtfully. There were no credit card receipts with Ryan's name on them. In fact, it was up in Dallas more than a year ago, and there was no paper trail at all. They gave me a cash receipt, but I know where it is. I can burn it and then there is nothing. He probably has a cash register record of the purchase, but it's not linked to my name. That's all they would accept. The guy was moving, liquidating a lot of merchandise, and needed cash quick. Hell, neither he nor I asked for my name. If the police do find him and speak with him, he won't be able to identify me because he doesn't know me from Adam. Nothing is wrong there. Everything can be destroyed, including the cameras, tape decks, VHS tapes, DVDs, and tape recorders. Thinking to the ceiling, he stated, we can get rid of all of it some way. After wiping my prints off, of course. All the equipment is one place in my garage and all the evidence I got with it is with me, out in my pickup, he continued. I didn't drill any holes in the wall to mount the cameras or anything, he thought. They were all just laying around, hidden in places I knew Carrie wouldn't look. He sighed. Susie homemaker she is not. What more might I be missing? They conversed for hours before ending in the wee hours of Saturday. The majority of the conversation had been on how to get rid of all the equipment and the massive amount of evidence he had collected against his wife. Though it was difficult to let go of, there was no way Ryan could have known what was going on, much less that he had personally looked into it. There could be doubts about what he'd observed during those investigations if that became known. Even if it was a long shot, it made no sense to take the opportunity. Consuela had been wondering how she was going to access Michael's laptop, but Ryan already knew the answer. When Michaels and Carrie arrived at the residence for their trysts, they were rushing. The two adulterers would invariably dash upstairs while the laptop was promptly parked on the sofa. It remained there till one of them came downstairs for the first time. Additionally, he was aware of how to get to the Gilchrists' home with Consuela without the upper floors discovering it. Behind the home was a broad expanse of undeveloped ground covered in a thicket of underbrush, some scruffy cedar and scrub oak. When they first moved into the new house, Ryan had done some research on it. He was able to navigate from a street on the opposite side of the undeveloped area all the way to their property. It was only a few hundred yards, maybe 5 minutes, at most. Once there, anyone in pretty decent shape could make their way through the chain-link fence around the backyard. Both he and Consuela were in superb physical shape. They could easily jump the fence without any trouble at all. The patio door at the residence moved effortlessly open and closed. For the most part, it was silent. He might leave it open for business when he got there. He was prepared to wager that Carrie would never check it when she returned home with her lover, so he would make sure he departed after her. The phone jack was located in the kitchen, just a short distance from the patio door that led to the dining room. Through a double-wide doorway, the dining room was just beyond the living room sofa where the laptop would be positioned. It would just be a matter of retracing their steps to get out. They were unsure of Consuela's expected stay on the laptop. They had reminded themselves to time the intervals between Michael's and Carrie's couplings by using a timer on the VHS tapes. They had assumed that the time they had on the day they pulled this off would restrict the number of moves Consuela could make. At last, it dawned on them that they could repeat this multiple times. It would have to happen over a short period of time, like a week, but it should be more than enough to take out enough money from the bank to cause any harm. Ryan was quite certain that if Carrie believed Ryan was out of town, she would seize the opportunity to invite her lover over. In fact, during his absence this week, she had most likely been doing Sean every day. When he got home tomorrow, he would know. He had left all the cameras and recording equipment in place, so there would be more videotapes to go through. Too exhausted to plot anything further, they called it a night. They made a deal before they left that they would never again take notes on paper or on a computer once they had this operation going. They would severely limit the notes they took, the ones they had previously taken to remind themselves of items they needed to look into more, and the additional ones they would make if they had no other choice. They would be burned and the ashes disposed of safely after their usage was over. They would never use a phone number that might be linked to any of them. Most importantly, they must never be seen together in public again until everything was resolved. They could never discuss this with anybody else. The last deal caused the most pain. Despite having only known one another for 5 days, they had already grown to feel at ease with one another. Realizing they couldn't afford to draw attention by being spotted together stung. Consuela checked on Belinda and then went to bed as Ryan returned to his accommodation. When the young child woke up and realized Ryan wasn't there, she would be upset. Ryan arrived home on Saturday afternoon to discover additional evidence of Carrie's adultery waiting for him. If he hadn't needed to time the intervals between the two's fights, he wouldn't have bothered to watch it. He didn't care how long he and Consuela would have for an average or maximum. It was the bare least they would budget for. Upon reviewing the records, he discovered that Consuela would have little over 25 minutes to work her magic each time. Carrie and Sean's sex sessions lasted for at least 30 minutes, with the exception of one brief instance. Ryan reasoned that since he and Consuela had only been in the house for 25 minutes, they would never be discovered. Their lead time was 5 minutes. He threw all the tapes, together with the majority of the cameras, recorders, audio tapes, and recorders, into a cardboard box in the garage. The package was placed inside his pickup's passenger side floorboard. Almost anything could safely hide in the truck because Carrie hadn't been around it in almost a year. He drove to Austin on Sunday afternoon and bought 6 prepaid cell phones. Consuela and Ryan would use them as a means of communication while they avoided each other in public. He made cash purchases at 6 other convenience stores to guarantee that the purchases were similarly untraceable, even if they were untraceable. He made sure the neighborhood stores were free of security cameras before he entered them. He was politely pleasant everywhere he went, and he smiled gently or kept his face neutral. With his unremarkable attire, the man would be forgotten by everyone. Carrie ignored him the entire weekend, when she wasn't being icy and confrontational. That was perfect for Ryan because he didn't want to spend any time with her and he didn't think they could ever become close. He felt physically sick at the thought of making love to her. She spent most of the weekend in bed. She was obviously exhausted, so Ryan thoughtfully left her alone to rest. He was starting to look forward to the prospect of doing something to Carrie and her Mr. Shawn Michaels with Consuela. On Monday evening, Consuela called her great-uncle Roberto from her aunt's home to ask her to temporarily leave the room. With a hint of unrepentant larceny in her veins, her aunt would have been delighted to learn what Consuela had in store. Though she understood, she was a little let down that Consuela wouldn't tell her. She assumed she would eventually learn the truth. After Consuela spoke with him, great-uncle Roberto was ready to answer when any of the 6 numbers appeared on his caller ID. Normally, he wouldn't have taken calls from an unknown number. Adding the call with domestic conversation she would have otherwise had with him, she ended the call. Driving a car that one of his workers had lent him, Ryan had made one late afternoon visit to her home. The man had actually suggested the exchange, saying he needed the huge truck to go back to San Antonio Tuesday morning to pick up a load of building supplies. When Ryan and Consuela traveled to and from his residence, he mentally noted that they would utilize rentals. Though he wasn't entirely sure how he would set everything up without creating a credit card transaction trace, he believed it was possible. Perhaps he could use a credit card to reserve the automobile, and then pay the remaining balance with cash, or perhaps he could make a sizable cash deposit on their behalf. He'd see what materialized. When her mother had left Belinda at home with Ryan while she went to her aunt's, Belinda had been overjoyed. Ryan found it enjoyable as well. Consuela arrived home and silently went through the kitchen door to see her little girl sleeping in Ryan's arms on the large easy chair. She kept a close eye on them before waking them. The unshed tears in her eyes took that long to dry up. For the next week, Consuela spoke with her great-uncle whenever she had free time, which wasn't often. He was busy calling in favors with contacts he had in locations Consuela had never heard of, including Belize, the Cayman Islands, Barbados, Bermuda, Antigua, Curacao, Aruba, Jamaica, and other places. Accounts in offshore banks that were known for upholding strict security protocols on behalf of their customers were available for usage within a few days. The majority of the accounts had lain dormant for a considerable amount of time, awaiting activation. Only a small number were new. Once the preliminary matters were resolved, Roberto had established a route for funds to pass via a bank in London. the Swiss Credit Bank, which is usually amiable, the Bank of Nigeria, and finally back to a location in the Caribbean. He realized whatever his great-niece was doing had a short half-life, and so he created several hundred distinct accounts. Neither the time nor the means to perform regular investment transactions would be available for the money to accrue. Half a week after great-uncle Roberto had completed routing and account setup, Consuela answered her front door to a beaming young Hispanic lad carrying a rewritable CD. Startled, Consuela took the jewel case with the CD inside. When she looked up, the boy had turned and gone out without a word. The CD was a spreadsheet that Ryan and Consuela had installed onto a used laptop that Ryan had paid cash for. They only let themselves to have that record. They couldn't have learned every story by heart, or else they wouldn't have had this one piece of evidence that implicated them. Before being thrown into the San Antonio River, the CD was broken up, melted, and sanded smooth. The angry couple expected to have to wait a few years for the inevitable investigations to wind down before allowing the money to sit in an account someplace. There was really no burden here. As planned, they anticipated being able to bring civil proceedings. They believed there was a strong possibility of winning them as well. The bank would be personally harmed by the lawsuits and punished for not upholding the morality provisions of their own contract. The goal of pilfering super-rich bank customers' accounts was to give the impression that Shawn Michaels and Carrie Gilchrist had planned a bank fraud scheme. Instead of being shot, they would have been treated in prison the same way they would have been in this same city a century before. Ryan and Consuela reasoned that the bank would replenish the funds pilfered from the wealthy bank account holders. If all the bank's wealthy clients threatened to withdraw all of their money, and they could be counted on to do just that, the bank could not afford to lose business. The bank would simply have to pay an additional fine for the loss. The next time, they would make sure that one of their top supervisors didn't use work time to harass a single mother physically or to take advantage of another man's wife. When Consuela and Ryan completed the active part of their plan, Richard, Consuela's elder second cousin, would store the laptop for them. Richard would not be interested in the laptop because he was not computer literate. In addition, he was a loner and had no friends. In fact, he didn't really get along with many of his own family members. Living in a primitive home tucked away behind a mesa and so remote that not even the ranch's cowboys ventured there, he had no modern amenities. With the owner's consent, he had constructed there as payment for a 20-year-old favor Richard had done for him. Nobody was certain of what it had been. Consuela and Ryan were primarily intrigued by Richard's living situation because of how isolated his home was and how difficult it was for anyone to approach without Richard spotting them coming a long distance. Nobody went to see Richard unless they took great care to identify themselves at the boundary of the piece of property he claimed. He had a reputation for shooting intruders to get them to move on. Consuela was confident that the laptop was secure with him, and she could have persuaded Ryan with ease. All of the preparations had been completed a month and a half after Ryan and Consuela's initial meeting. The accounts were prepared. The first untraceable cell phones they'd ever used to talk to each other had been broken, with the components lying around in 6 San Antonio dumpsters. The entire set of equipment Ryan had bought from the spy shop, together with the recordings he'd made with it, had been burned, destroyed, and the remains dumped in a city dump located 100 miles distant. They had destroyed all of their written notes and disposed of the ashes in the San Antonio River to the south of the town. He had already emptied the storage bin in the garage where he had kept the books and disposed of the contents with care. He used a lot of elbow grease and cleaning solution to give the entire garage a thorough cleaning because he didn't want that spot to stick out. They were prepared as far as they could have been. Ryan was supposed to stay at home for a week or two in order to obstruct the lovers' trysts. After working hard for several months, he told Carrie he needed time to rest and recharge, so he took a leave of absence from work. There was no cause to force him out of the house, so she could barely resist. Throughout the week, Ryan was quite helpful. He would frequently drop by the bank to take her to lunch or just stop by in the middle of the afternoon to show her a purchase, ask for advice, or just to talk for a little while she was on break. He and Carrie went to a fancy hotel on the Riverwalk on Friday night for a dinner given by a vice president of the bank. It was a pretext for a dressy fall evening out to make up for the time between Labor Day and the official holidays. Ryan hadn't attended the one the previous year. He was not fond of most of the individuals Carrie worked with, and this year he surprised Carrie by wanting to go. She made a few attempts to talk him out of it, but Ryan seemed uninterested. When she saw the exquisitely fitted tuxedo he had purchased especially for the occasion, complete with the finest accessories he could locate, he took her by surprise once more. His wild hair had been tamed by a visit to the barber that afternoon, and he'd shaved quite carefully. She remarked on his neatly groomed nails after noticing them. It was hard to keep one's nails long enough to manicure in his line of work. Ryan remained close to his wife during the dance, despite her occasional attempts to sway him toward other partygoers. When she introduced him to Shawn Michaels once more, he grinned to himself. When Carrie brought Ryan over to Shawn and his friends, it was interesting to squeeze the man's pallid hand and gaze down into his eyes, even though Ryan already knew who he was from past encounters. The cost of the tuxedo was more than justified by the slightly enlarged pupils and the clear look of anguish when Ryan's grip tightened. Ryan was considerably taller than Mr. Michaels, but he hadn't recognized it until now, standing at 6 feet, 1 inch. He could see Michaels wasn't fond of it, and Carrie didn't appear to perceive the two men's obvious differences either. Shortly afterward, Ryan strayed from Carrie's side, but his alone was short-lived. When Ryan shook Michael's hand, a number of women, attached and not, had witnessed the byplay and sought a closer look at the contest winner. Carrie looked at him across the room, 3 ladies fighting for her tall, powerful husband's attention, and he saw the annoyance on her face. When Ryan made a second introduction to Shawn Michaels' wife, Sharon Michaels, Carrie seemed noticeably more worried. He had not seen her since they had first met at one of the usual parties earlier in the year. The pretty blonde spoke to Ryan informally for 30 minutes. As their talk was coming to a close, Sharon became sidetracked by something behind Ryan. He spun around to see Carrie standing near Shawn, grinning directly into his eyes. There was nothing obviously alarming about their demeanor or stance, they were just part of the crowd, but Sharon was keeping a close eye on them. A trace of a frown was just disappearing from Sharon's face as he turned back to face her. She was unable to conceal the grief in her eyes. Ryan was at a loss for what to do. He knew too little about her to comment on what he did know. He wasn't sure how she would react, and this wasn't the ideal moment or location to take a chance. In the second week, Ryan's fake interest in Carrie, which he saw as a smokescreen and bait for a trap, slowed down. It had fulfilled its function. Carrie and Michaels were so terrified that they didn't even try to set up a meeting place for fear that Ryan would appear out of the blue. As he had done the week before, Ryan did make a few brief trips to and from other locations when he returned to the bank to keep the adulterous couple off balance. It was successful. By the conclusion of the second week, Carrie was obviously nervous and irritated. Shawn was probably feeling just as physically unsatisfied. Consuela and Ryan gave themselves props. He was a primed pump. On the first date of Carrie and Shawn, Ryan's first Monday back at work, it was even easier to get into the house than he had anticipated. By making it a point to take Carrie to an early lunch, Ryan had managed to nearly perfectly timing when the two lovers would leave work for the afternoon. On Sunday, he arranged everything, telling Carrie he would stop over to pick her up before leaving town for an Austin business meeting. She had agreed. After all, Ryan had made it so difficult for her to say no, and recommended a Taco Bell that was close to the downtown bank. Ryan was aware that the idea of having a fast food dinner was intended to end the situation swiftly and get him out of town. He was cool with that. His sole intention when having lunch with her was to ensure that she and Shawn Michaels were unable to leave work early in the morning. It would be unnecessary for Ryan and Consuela to spend the entire day waiting for something to happen outside the Gilchrist home. To go around, Ryan and Consuela borrowed anonymous cars from Consuela's family rather than renting cars. Today they were riding in the automobile of Consuela's cousin Alfredo. For the remainder of the week, they would borrow cars from acquaintances and other members of Consuela's family, a new vehicle every day. Consuela's aunt had talked to several people she trusted, which is how it worked. Every morning by 7 a.m., she made arrangements for a smoothly operating, fully charged car to be parked in a side lot, with the keys hidden beneath the mat. Consuela and Ryan had complete use of the car for the whole day, even though Consuela's aunt was unaware that he was involved. It was agreed upon that upon its return to the parking lot, an envelope containing several $100 and $20 bills would be found beneath the mat containing the keys. There would be no queries and no responses. Ryan had informed his senior foreman that he intended to extend his leave and visit the deer lease he had held for many years in the vicinity of Marble Falls. Even though he had already been out of the office for 2 weeks, it wasn't out of the ordinary. Around this same time every year, Ryan would always get some deer tags and use his brief vacation to drive up to the cabin on the lease at Marble Falls, which is located north of San Antonio. It wasn't noteworthy enough to warrant discussion. In previous years, the business's revenue had not been sufficient to provide for the 3-week vacation. All of them wished him luck on the hunt. Consuela was ill. She informed her supervisor that it was that crud going around, or perhaps it was the flu. Since she hadn't received a vaccination this year, she sincerely hoped it wasn't a new strain. She was planning to take a sick day, anyway. She hoped to return the following day, or perhaps even tomorrow. The manager of the bank hoped she would soon be feeling better and sent her best wishes. While waiting in the little parking lot of the BBQ restaurant, Ryan and Consuela talked about anything and everything that came to mind. They were gradually realizing how much they enjoyed simply sitting and talking, and it helped pass the time. They were starting to value just spending time together, no matter what. One bug, a sensitive listening device that Ryan had placed to the back of a small table in the foyer, was still there and would alert them whenever Carrie and her boss entered. After entering the eatery, Consuela emerged with a bag of sandwiches made with pulled pork. Ryan was still hungry after his hurried lunch with Carrie, so she and he had eaten a couple each, but the main reason for the purchase had been to provide an explanation for the completely ordinary car's presence in the restaurant's parking lot. "Well, it's just about damn time," Ryan remarked. He had just looked at his watch, figuring that after lunch he and Michaels should have had plenty of time to arrange their excuses and head out for a few hours of decadent fun. The speaker of the portable receiving unit sitting on the dash was obviously making noise as the key rattled in the front door lock. It was certain, almost immediately, by the joyful voices that followed. Carrie had come with her partner. Consuela and Ryan swiftly exited the large gray Ford. They were cautious, but they didn't have time to waste. Ryan walked Consuela into the scrub oak and undergrowth to the west of the restaurant, taking a quiet moment to be sure no one was looking. It stopped right behind Ryan's house in the same stand of dwarfed trees and dense underbrush. They discussed wearing all black and possibly covering their faces with masks or something, but they'd swiftly written that idea off. If you went around looking like wannabe ninjas, everyone would notice you. Rather, they made do with a wig to hide Consuela's actual hair color, simple, worn baseball hats, dark sunglasses, and utterly unimpressive clothes. Their shirts and slacks were muted shades of brown, gray, and green. Their shoes were plain and dark in hue. The boots and shoes they had purchased for this assignment came in a range of sizes. They could tolerate overly tight shoes for the brief period they would need to on one day. One day they'd put on several pairs of heavy socks and oversized shoes. Everything they wore was from Goodwill and Salvation Army stores in Austin, Dallas, and Houston. It was everything clean but well used. Nothing had been bought in the area. At the conclusion of the day that they were utilized, all 6 sets of clothes and shoes, the 5 that they estimated they would require plus an extra, would be burnt. The deepest area of multiple local lakes would contain a scattering of metal zippers, buttons, sunglasses, and other metal objects. Just 10 minutes, maybe a bit longer, were needed to make the couple hundred yards through the tiny trees and underbrush. Ryan purposefully took Consuela on a circuitous route through areas where they wouldn't leave tracks, even though they might have completed the task in less time. It wasn't hard, really, to locate areas with hard-pin dirt or exposed rock where their shoes wouldn't leave any trace. They would return in the same manner, and Ryan would sweep the areas where they had left a track with a branch. This was the only time they will take that specific route. Nothing was in the hands of chance that they could control. They pulled on disposable latex gloves from their pockets at the edge of the woods. To ensure that their disguises, if any, held, they scrutinized each other's appearances closely. Consuela gave Ryan a thumbs up, and Ryan returned the favor with a hesitant smile. The two didn't wait around for long, and they purposefully headed to the patio entrance by jumping the fence. They did not flee. They had designed their stroll to look as organic as possible. Behind their thick glasses, they continued to move their eyes. They noticed nothing worrisome from the houses on either side and nobody at the windows of the house they would be entering. Tall shrubs on both sides of the Gilchrist house obscured them very well from anyone who might have been at the windows of the neighboring houses 3 steps into the yard. With a confident motion, Ryan slid open the patio door with the ease of long familiarity. As he had anticipated, Carrie had returned home in the middle of the day without remembering to make sure the house was locked. The glass door softly closed behind them a few seconds later. He and Consuela stepped to one side so they would be hidden from view from the outside and stood side by side. For a long while, they barely dared to breathe. Ryan gave Consuela a glimpse at his watch's face. Regardless of what they'd done or not done, they'd agreed that at 26 minutes, they would be leaving the house. The woman gave a nod of comprehension. Ryan lowered his arm to his side and activated the stopwatch. They listened for a moment longer. They were not professionals. Every moment they had stepped out of the automobile, their hearts had been in their throats. Their pulse rates were racing because their bodies had overflowed their blood vessels with adrenaline. It was just the moment they needed to concentrate on what they were going to do. He nodded firmly and smiled at his partner. Feeling reassured, Consuela glanced around the living room, saw the laptop on the couch, and gingerly made her way across the carpet to get it. Ryan had shown her how to walk, just as his grandfather had. It was the gait of Comanche warriors who were tracking prey or adversaries. She had been practicing at random times for the last 2 weeks, so as she walked across a creaky wooden floor, her footsteps were audible to everyone walking beside her. Ryan gave a wolfish smile. Consuela went into the kitchen and sat at the table with the laptop. She was inputting Michael's password on the bank's server and logging it in under a minute. When it did, they were just somewhat taken aback. They were aware that all users on the bank's server were required by rule to update their passwords at least once every 60 days. But Shawn Michaels considered himself superior to all of that. He had not given a damn. Consuela grinned at Ryan as she arranged the pages of a spreadsheet that Great Uncle Roberto had printed out and placed on the table next to the laptop. They would burn the paper sheets in their clothes at some point tonight. They would depend on Great Uncle Roberto's backup and the digital copy on the laptop Richard's cousin was watching after. They concealed additional printed spreadsheets including other account numbers in Ryan's truck for the bank raids they planned to carry out during the course of the remaining visits this week. Consuela got to work tracking down the accounts of several extremely wealthy individuals who had given Shawn Michaels and Carrie Gilchrist custody of their fortune. Before long, she was inputting commands into the system at the speed of her fingers. They were too drunk to control themselves back in the car. Regardless of how cheesy the joke was, they laughed heartily at one another's remarks. Consuela kept extending her hand and wrist toward Ryan. She was unable to resist. They had plotted and were now guilty of a major offense. To comfort one another, they required the intimacy. They became silent after a time as the excitement went off, but his hand was still covering hers. As the realization of the magnitude of what they had done dawned on them both, it provided solace. When they arrived at the spot where they would swap automobiles, holding hands simply felt right. They promptly departed from the parking lot of the BBQ restaurant, taking care to stay well inside the speed limit as they followed a route they had planned out a week prior. Although it had been challenging, they managed to navigate a route across the city, skirting all the locations where they could see security cameras facing the street or where they may have fairly expected them to be but couldn't instantly locate. Even if the tapes from every private residence and company along that road were analyzed, they didn't think they would attract much attention with their boring, uninteresting car, wigs, caps, dark sunglasses, and carefully nondescript attire. When they could, they held a hand up to their faces and kept their headwear down in case something happened. There was always the extremely slim possibility that they would be seen as they drove past someone they knew. When they got back to the parking lot where Ryan and Consuela's automobiles were, they got down to their underwear and filled a large garbage bag with everything they had used that day. The sack was placed in Ryan's pickup's rear seat. Their mutual semi-nakedness made them feel a little uncomfortable. Ultimately, this was their first encounter with each other in their undies. Neither acknowledged the discomfort in the other. Everybody believed the other was cool and collected. Neither believed the other to be even somewhat self-conscious. They got dressed fast and went their separate ways. Ryan had to hurry to get to the hunting cabin he was using in the hill country close to Marble Falls while Consuela went to pick up Belinda from daycare. He would burn everything in the sack tonight and sort through the ashes to find buttons, metal components, and other items. He had a 16-foot flat-bottom fishing boat up there, and somewhere before daybreak he would take it and empty the metal pieces and ashes into the deepest recesses of the surrounding lake. Who knew, he could even manage to catch a few of bass for breakfast. But more importantly, there would be no trace of anything he and Consuela had done left behind. By Friday, Ryan and Carrie had established a comfortable rhythm. It was very almost monotonous. They had to put a lot of effort into reminding one another to maintain the strict security protocols they were rehearsing. Since the only decent entry point into the brush was right off the restaurant's parking lot, they parked there every day, perhaps near the BBQ restaurant. They made sure no one would spot the same couple roaming around for the entire week by dressing differently and staging subtle variations in their posture and speed. During that week, Shawn Michaels and Carrie Gilchrist managed to sneak off to the Gilchrist residence every day. Although they didn't always meet at the Gilchrist residence, they always scheduled a meeting time. Ryan found it regrettable that Shawn Michaels never just went for a stay at a motel to have a change of scenery. The greatest thing that could be said about the man was that he was cheap. Consuela was especially depressed because she didn't think there was anything more to say about the man. It took Ryan and Consuela less than half the time on Friday to change into their disguises than it had on Monday. They parked close to the BBQ restaurant, went slowly toward it holding hands, and passed it by without pausing. After letting the remote portable receiving device earpiece fall out of his ear, Ryan pocketed it. It's highly likely that the two Bexar County Sheriff's police cars that were facing the other way in the parking lot were there purely for the purpose of protecting the cops who were inside breaking up a big plate of ribs. There was no obtrusive commotion of law enforcement personnel arriving and departing, nor was there any indication of any continuing investigation either within the restaurant or in the small area of wilderness adjacent to it. Nobody pursued them, nor did they express any curiosity as they went past. That was all completely irrelevant. Ryan asked in a quiet voice, a block away from the location, "Wave off." Although Consuela was unfamiliar with the term, it was evident what it meant. Beneath the floppy army surplus bush cap she was wearing today, she gave a subtle nod. She glanced around at the corner as if to make sure there was no traffic before they crossed the street. "No one is coming," she said. "Still," Ryan said, "it's the better part of valor." "It's a sign," Consuela declared firmly. Ryan didn't challenge her assessment. They strolled around the block and back to the borrowed automobile they had for the day without seeming to be in a rush, got in, and drove off. The clothes they had just taken off went into their final black garbage bag, together with the sets they hadn't worn, and they placed the bag in Ryan's pickup. He swiftly left the area and gave the other person a much-needed kiss before tucking an envelope with $300 under the seat. Their actions possessed a sense of urgency that was absent previously. They convinced themselves that nothing had changed from their adventure the day before, but the threat posed by the non-offensive patrol cars made them doubt that. They were happy that this stage was finished. After returning after his allegedly fruitless hunt the following day, Ryan took out the audio pickup from the front door. On the concrete garage floor, he smashed it with his heel and picked up every piece with care. That evening, they were each put into a few dumpsters around the city, momentarily contained in a garbage bag. An hour after Consuela's late-night phone call that same Saturday night, Great Uncle Roberto started distributing the word. The next Monday, employees at numerous banks across the Caribbean, including men and women with instantly forgettable faces and unremarkable looks, started withdrawing money from accounts by using passwords that the institutions knew were only likely known by the real account holders. They went to other private banks and made deposits as directed by them after taking the cashier's checks and occasionally the cash. The moment the cashier's check deposits into secondary accounts suddenly flushed, the computers could hardly keep up with the looting. The following afternoon, there was a negative balance in all of the accounts. All deposits and withdrawals were made in cash after that. Thousands of relatively little sums eventually made their way to Roberto's special number accounts in private banking institution, usually in US dollars. There was not a single cry for 3 weeks. As soon as something caught his attention, Ryan was certain he would see something in the newspaper or on the radio. That would be the biggest thing to happen there in the bank's history. He was aware of this since Consuela discovered, upon adding together all the transactions, that they had transferred about $9 million into offshore accounts. Naturally, none of that money was found in the original location, and investigators would soon discover that the trail ran cold. Tracking the money past the first or second deposit account would be nearly impossible. After completing their tasks, the anonymous men and women who had depleted one account and transferred the funds to another had left. In a dozen Caribbean cities, they had already dissolved back into the anonymous crowd, storing their elegant gowns and suits for the inevitable day when they would be needed again. Even if they had been forced to testify, they could not have identified the source of their instructions because they had been issued by other, anonymous, and unidentifiable individuals who similarly vanished from the population. It was impossible for anyone to track down the final destination of the monies after they had been transferred 3 and 4 times. Simply put, there were too many cutouts. Without leaving even the tiniest trace on anyone, the money vanished into the vast wealth pool that floats between the Caribbean banks. Over $800 billion worth of assets are held by the banks in the Cayman Islands alone, and comparable sums are held by the other offshore institutions. When $9 million were dumped in, not even a ripple occurred. Naturally, small candies were removed each time the funds were transferred. It made no difference. Over $7 million remained after everyone had taken their share and great-uncle Roberto had taken his. That satisfied Ryan and Consuela completely. The bank was severely burned. They were certain that the extent of the loss would be painful. The money started to come into Mexico City through ordinary transactions on accounts that Roberto was in charge of. Considering that Consuela had had to limit her transactions to under $10,000 each, the sum was astounding. Their intention was not to cause suspicion by submitting fraudulent currency transaction reports, which are necessary for wire transfers exceeding $10,000. Even more impressively, Consuela had programmed a plethora of auto transfers to take place even after she disconnected. In fact, this was how the majority of the job was completed after the first day. Everything was incredibly easy. The power of a single login name and a 12-character password was astounding. Yes, indeed. There was going to be a small explosion down there inside the business sector when anyone realized. It was just a question of time. Consuela and Ryan carried on with their daily routines as usual. All they needed to do was wait. "Hello," the faint voice said. The parts of the prepaid cell phones were not of the highest quality. Ryan asked, "How you doing?" Even with the cheap phone distorting her speech, he was already familiar with Consuela's voice. It was the time of day they had scheduled their conversation, which they now did almost every evening. Despite how shaky the touch was, they enjoyed it. "Excellent, excellent. What about you?" she replied. Ryan said, "Doing great. Tired of waiting, but good otherwise." He would not go any farther than that. They would say nothing that, in their opinion, could be interpreted by anyone listening as being connected to the largest bank heist in Texas history. He was driving his pickup on the southeast part of town today, a long way from his house and place of employment. He had called her from his place yesterday. Cellular relay towers in every area of the city would not be able to handle calls from these numbers, with the exception of those that are made directly to home or work. They took great care to arrange every aspect of their normalcy. "Yes, me too," she replied. A prolonged silence ensued, accompanied by muffled background noise. "Hello, Mr. Ryan." Ryan's expression softened. "Hi, how are you doing, Belinda?" he asked kindly. "With a fine," the young girl replied. "When will you be visiting me?" she said cynically. Ryan hadn't found a reason to get out of town and visit her mother's place in a while. Ryan said, "Yeah, I believe I'll be there on Sunday." On Monday, he had a few crews scheduled to return to the small village. He had worked out a special deal, or group rate, with many Main Street shops for renovated storefronts. He had informed his spouse that he intended to leave early to observe them. Carrie was fine with it. She was relieved to have him gone. He spoke with the 4-year-old for a short while. Because he didn't talk down to her, she cherished their chats, which he enjoyed having. They were both excited about his surprise visit on Sunday night. When Consuela managed to free her daughter's tiny hands from holding the cell phone, she said, "Are you still there?" Ryan laughed. He had overheard the conversation that took place as Consuela was trying to get back in control. Belinda was not pleased with herself for dropping the phone. It was Belinda's favorite thing to do, so he said, I think she needs to be taken out to Baskin-Robbins for an ice cream cone or something like that Sunday. Consuela asked a bit louder than necessary. Baskin-Robbins? That was done with Belinda in mind. The fussing in the background soon subsided to, I don't know. Do you think she's been a good enough girl for that? Ryan laughed once again. There was a brief silence. Last night, I watched an interesting TV show, Consuela remarked nonchalantly. Oh? Ryan asked. Yeah, on Channel 16, she replied, at 10 o'clock. It's on every weeknight at that same time. Ryan questioned inquisitively, what's the name of it? Consuela was not typically so reserved, yet they talked about whatever that came to mind. Something in her tone told him something. She said a little uncomfortably, it's called Busted, and I think it's a show taped up in Dallas. Maybe Houston or somewhere like that. He inquired, oh, what's it about? Consuela retorted, I'd rather you just take a look at it and tell me what you think. She obviously didn't want to talk about it over the phone. Ryan consented to peek at the show after giving up on attempting to get anything out of her. After another 10 minutes of conversation, Ryan got stuck in traffic, so they had to hang up. The day after tomorrow, they would cross paths again. It has to happen quickly enough. In his study, he watched the television program. It was silent upstairs with the door closed, and he'd just put in a new Lazy Boy recliner. He doubted Carrie had noticed at all. She hardly ever went anywhere in the house these days where he could be expected to be. Carrie had yet another in her never-ending string of headaches, so she had gone to bed early. Ryan's continuous lack of interest in connecting was starting to get on her nerves, though he could sense she wasn't concerned enough to take action just yet. She was happy enough that Ryan was taking care of her security needs for the time being. Shawn Michaels took care of the majority of her emotional and physical needs. She was eating her cake as well as having it. She didn't really have anything in her life that she would change. The TV show began with a description of a Houston-based private investigation company. Unsurprisingly, Ryan was unaware of the agency's name. In any case, this Austin-filmed episode followed a young lady who had grown wary of her live-in lover. Their only child was born a few months ago. It appeared that he had grown apart from her and was acting impulsively. She asked Busted to look into her suspicions that he was having an extramarital affair. She was accurate. The boyfriend was already seeing another lady and had found a new girlfriend. One evening, the girl and the host met to see video footage of her boyfriend cuddling, kissing, and running out of sight behind a motel door with another lady. Following a period of sobbing and visibly distressed behavior, the presenter led the girl and a video team to the outside eatery where the woman and her boyfriend were enjoying supper. The boyfriend's expression as the camera crew began filming was like a deer caught in headlights. He never really healed, and for a while he silently endured a great deal of verbal abuse from his new girlfriend as well as from his significant other. The host promised to make the confrontation's outcome public later. In the second episode, a guy in Houston suspected that his wife was seeing someone else at the gym, and he believed that she might be having an affair. With the exception of the rearranged roles and marginally altered details, this installment was nearly identical to the previous one. The end credits said that the private investigator service provided by the Pi firm was free of charge if the participant's case was featured in the TV program. Even though Ryan knew exactly what he was going to do, he gave it 10 minutes of contemplation to be sure it was the proper choice. Then he went to the number displayed on the screen and picked up the phone. He planned to contact a lawyer early the next day and inform them of his suspicion that his spouse was having an extramarital affair, along with the steps he had taken to reveal the infidelity. He was aware of what the detectives on the TV show would discover. The extended wait was almost over. It was a pitch-black night, with lightning accumulating in the northwest. Up in the hill country, a storm was intensifying and about to laze into the largest city it would encounter. This year's Indian summer had been exceptionally long, with uncommonly pleasant days and cool evenings. It was warm. Everybody had shirt sleeves or light jackets on, and raincoats or ponchos were kept handy. The camerawoman took a firm posture, spreading her feet apart, and making sure her knees weren't locked as the host gestured to her. She had witnessed several men and women who worked behind the camera collapse onto their faces due to low blood flow. She had never realized that people who pass out always fell forward. That was unknown to her. For the same reason she refrained from the habit, she would have been shocked to hear that military troops were frequently advised not to lock their knees while standing at attention in formation. The presenter grabbed Ryan by the arm and pulled him in close after everyone was positioned so they would both fit in the frame. He started talking. He expressed regret for having to request Ryan's early return from his work vacation. They were well informed about the argument Ryan had presented to them. Although he apologized, he had to inform Ryan that his wife was, in fact, breaking their marital vows tonight. Ryan looked really sad. He believed he did it quite well, but just in case, he turned and briefly moved away from the host and the camera. For a long while, there was simply his broad back to observe. Ryan cleared his throat, not wanting to overdo it, and turned back to the host. When the presenter asked to view the videotape proof he carried with him, he nodded slowly yes. The little cameras the detectives on the television had taught him how to set up in his bedroom had been very fancy equipment. The images of his wife having sex with her lover were vivid and distinct. They were videos he'd taken with his own spy cameras, at least a factor of 10 better. Ryan, looking distressed as he peered at the view screen of the tiny digital camcorder, pulled at his newly grown beard. He had a great mustache and beard to change the way he looked. The owner of the Dallas espionage shop wouldn't know him because he'd grown them and was sporting a Texas Rangers baseball cap. It was just one of the many just-in-case precautions he and Consuela had taken over the last several months to keep their secret safe. He would also be able to hide his face from the residents of the little town located 50 miles away from San Antonio thanks to his beard and mustache. Although he and Consuela hadn't been spotted together in public, even at the cafe, for a few months, it didn't hurt to exercise a little extra caution. Naturally, the host was aware that Ryan was amenable to viewing the film. The producer who had contacted Ryan in Memphis 2 days prior had expressed regret in full, but they hoped Ryan could get together with them on Friday night so they could bring a whole film crew to San Antonio. Ryan had agreed to the show capturing him watching the explicit videotape and had informed the producer over the phone that he would attend. Ryan had no need for the conference he was attending in Memphis. Actually, his purpose for leaving town was to give Carrie the impression that she could do anything she wished. He consented to go home right away. Ryan suddenly got an idea when the host asked the question he had earlier promised to ask, namely, the one about asking his wayward wife for an explanation. He made wild gestures toward the producer and camera. He said to them, wait, I got an idea. As Ryan described his idea, the host and producer's displeasure vanished from their expressions. It was known that he had identified Shawn Michaels from the videos. It was captured on camera. They were unaware that Ryan knew Michaels' wife well enough to give her a call. At his idea that they give her a call and ask her to the confrontation, as they called it, they grinned widely. Ryan received a cell phone from someone that had the top flipped open. Mrs. Michaels? Inquired Ryan. Yes, a hesitant feminine voice said. Sharon, this is Ryan Gilchrist. He glumly introduced himself. Oh, hello, she answered Ryan. There'd been no hesitation. Despite the fact that it had been some time since their last encounter, she instantly recognized his name. Despite this, her tone seemed unhappy. Ryan made the decision to cut right to the chase and not mince words. Sharon, I'm just as sorry as I could be to tell you this, but your husband and my wife have been having an affair, he stated honestly. A quick intake of breath could be heard, but Sharon remained silent for a moment. At last, Ryan said, Sharon. She answered, yes, I'm here. Her voice carried a fatalistic note. She inquired, how long have you known? I've suspected for months, but I saw proof of it this evening, replied Ryan. He was prepared for that inquiry in whatever form, and he had a suitably vague response at the ready. I see, an uncomfortable Sharon Michaels remarked. Well, I can't say it's a big surprise, she sighed. Damn him, she continued. Sharon, the thing is, Ryan was unsure about how to bring up the following subject. Well, I'll just blurt it out, he said to her. There was a long period of stillness on the other end of the line, then she said, Sharon, I'm with a film crew from a TV show out of Houston. And, we're about to go surprise them on a date in a restaurant down on the Riverwalk. Sharon exhaled into the phone. Oh, wow. Suddenly, she burst out laughing like a schoolgirl into the phone. She laughed even harder. You're going to do a number on my dumb husband, aren't you? Serves him right, the jerk. Yeah. Sharon, I don't know if I should say it this way, but I'm going to destroy him and my wife tonight, Ryan stated to her. After a brief period of quiet, he said, I can't imagine he'll be able to keep his job, and I'm sorry for what that will do to you. Sharon answered, Nah, don't worry about it. He's got a big all-golden parachute in his contract, and he'll get a nice settlement even if they fire him tomorrow morning. I'll have all of that, and my pound of flesh too, before I'm through with him, she said. Ryan exclaimed angrily into the phone. He was beaming widely. I don't blame you a bit, but, listen, Sharon, the last thing I have to say is, do you want to come with us and drop a double bombshell on these two jerks? Sharon remained quiet for a while longer. I hadn't thought about that. I'm not sure I want my face plastered all over. You know what? I think that's exactly what I need to get a little closure on this. Yeah, I'll go with you. Where are you? Let me have the producer tell you all the specifics about where it's going to happen and stuff like that, Ryan said. He gave the producer the cell phone and led him to set everything up when she indicated it was all right. It wasn't too lengthy. She would sign a contract authorizing them to use her voice and likeness in the TV show once she arrived at the setup location. After that, they would give her a battery-operated lapel microphone, similar to the one Ryan had fastened to his shirt collar. In the small of his back, the power pack was linked onto his belt. He had to be cautious not to lean back against a solid surface because of its sharp corners. It seems to require a team of 3 people to operate each of the 4 large cameras. There has to be someone guiding the man or woman with the big video camera in addition to them. They didn't need the cameraman or woman to take their eyes off the lens because they were pulling on their clothes or guiding them with a hold around the waist. The third person had a large boom mic that, in one instance, she could thrust directly overhead to record anything the subjects in front of the camera said. The cameras and host were accompanied by a group of men and 2 women who the producer introduced as certified private investigators. Nearly as many of them existed as there were witnesses to the incident. All along, the presenter called them security and detectives. Prior to the event, the producer had entered the boisterous nightclub and approached the manager to inform her of the situation. The management anticipated the excitement the show would bring to the club because she had seen it previously. She didn't find it problematic. Happy people were excited people. Her purpose for being in business was to fulfill their large drink orders. She made arrangements for the camera teams to enter by a side door, informed the bouncers of the situation, and gave them the go-ahead to move aside. To make it to the table closest to the dance floor even faster, she disabled the automatic alarm that opened that door. Ryan and the host hurried through the door and inside the club. Ryan was nearly overtaken by the camera operators and their handlers, who were rushing to record the action they were certain would happen. The pair seated at the side table was unaffected by the boisterous cheer that erupted as the clubgoers recognized them, while Shawn Michaels was twisted about in his seat, presumably completing a receipt while speaking to a server wearing a short skirt. Carrie had her back to the advancing gathering of men and women. Until the main camera team switched on the large floodlight, neither of them noticed anything out of the ordinary. Carrie leaped onto her seat and turned to see the situation. For a moment, she was completely blind and unable to see anything. Ryan barked, "Hello, Carrie, what's up?" He tried his hardest not to let the malice in his voice show. It was not simple. It had taken a while for this day to arrive. Carrie was astounded. Her eyes widened. More than 4.5 years had passed since Ryan had barged in on her and Marshall, so she was taken aback and shocked even more. The host introduced himself to her as Johnny Waterfield from the television program Busted. She seemed not to understand what he was saying as she gave him an incredulous expression. She appeared hardly to notice his presence. "What?" she muttered. However, the boom mic certainly captured it. "Would you like to explain to Ryan what you're doing here with this man?" Coughing loudly, "We're just friends." "No, that's not true, and you know it," Johnny shot back. "We have videotape of you and Mr. Michaels slept together in your own home on several occasions," she was told. "Do you have anything to say to that?" She gave a headshake. Her eyes were getting a little crazy. She was an animal entrapped. She was surrounded by club patrons and TV crews on all sides, making it impossible for her to escape. All she could do was look horrified into the camera's lens. She found it impossible to turn away. "We're just friends," she objected once more. "We're just having a few drinks and—" Ryan yelled, "Is that right?" He gestured past her off shoulder and said, "Just friends? How about talking to another of your friends?" He growled, "Say hello to Sharon." It wasn't essential to pretend anything now, but Ryan had been concerned that he wouldn't be able to react naturally. Once more, he was truly furious over his wife's infidelity. He'd endured it for such a long time. Letting it out felt amazing. Silently moving behind the table, Sharon Michaels borrowed an entire pitcher of beer from a nearby table. She spilled the beer on her spouse as the camera moved slightly to position her in the picture. Carrie's gauzy white top was sprayed with enough of the icy liquid that it was almost translucent. He shook his head, taking in her high-heeled stiletto heels and micro-miniskirt. Perched on the opposite side of the table, a second camera crew expertly captured his look of contempt. Ryan scoffed, "Have you even got panties on?" He did not wait for an answer before reaching down to lift up his wife's skirt, only to discover that she was not wearing any. A section of the crowd that was visible enough roared. Viewers of the finished movie would have little trouble identifying what had been omitted from another image, even if it needed to be altered with a fuzzy circle. Carrie swiftly reached down to pull the skirt back into position. She tucked her legs under the table, struggling to move. Shawn Michaels, across from her, was still having trouble clearing the beer out of his eyes. He was still without a word. His face was pallid, and his eyes were large circles. He was splitting his gaze between his enraged spouse and the camera. Sharon wasn't letting the fact that he hadn't said anything stop her from berating him severely. She asked loudly, "What do you have to say for yourself? Speak up, sob. What are you doing here with this woman?" The audience was thrilled, and the volume increased once more. The producer's face was filled with beatific expressions. This would require much editing, but it would be the best episode he had produced in the previous 18 months. Thumb and forefinger interlocked, Sharon reached out and grabbed her husband's earlobe. She pulled him from his chair and started to drag him in the direction of the door. It sparked a mass migration. With a lurch, Carrie got up and attempted to push her way out of the club. She was unsteady on her 5-inch heels and in a state of shock. The patrons of the club were also not complying. She tried to hurry out, but they protested, and several men used the chance to give her a feel while she made her way to the front door. She was blind to it. She trotted down the sidewalk desperately, and the camera crew followed her every step. Suddenly realizing that she was headed in the incorrect direction, she had to circle back to the parking lot where her car had been parked. The customers who were still gathering outside were even delighted as we went back past the club. Her skirt and top were now sticking to her body because of the rain. Her hair was stuck to her head and her mascara was running. She swerved into an alley and labored through it until she eventually saw a doorway leading inside a building, providing her with a temporary haven. Breathing out, "I can't believe." The primary camera team and the host remained with her. "What, Carrie?" inquired Johnny with curiosity. "Would you like to explain why you've been seeing another man behind your husband's back? I'm sure he'd like to know." Carrie sobbed. "I can't believe he'd humiliate me this way." For a minute, Johnny's professional expression was horrified as he gazed at her in amazement. He was momentarily let down by his line of speech. He repeatedly questioned, "Don't you think you've been the one doing the humiliating, Carrie?" Carrie remained silent. It's possible she didn't even hear him. She found it difficult to go past the host and proceed down the alley. Upon reaching her automobile, her trembling fingers refused to cooperate. It was difficult for her to get her keys out of her little clutch bag and into the lock. At last, Johnny took them from her and led her through the door. It took her multiple attempts to free them from his grasp before he eventually relinquished them. None of his questions would get a response from her. She simply continued to shake her head no. Ryan rapped his knuckles hard on the window pane as he knocked. "Hey, sweetie," he joked, "what's your hurry? The party's not over yet. Look what I have for you." After Ryan called the TV show's producers in the morning, his lawyer had been prepared and eager to go, but the papers remained in Ryan's file, awaiting the appropriate moment to be presented. 2 days earlier, Ryan received a call from the producer and promptly contacted the attorney to initiate necessary procedures. Ryan had already signed the divorce petition, which was brought to the courthouse and submitted to the court clerk. Ryan needed to set up a particular necessary formality, and that was about to take place. Ryan moved aside to make room for the older man approaching the entrance in his cream-colored Stetson and Western suit. The man, who was short and thin, showed Carrie his ID and process server badge. Despite being just another paid private investigator, Ryan thought the badge was incredibly official. She looked for a long time, bewildered. She finally rolled down the window in response to the man's motion. "Carrie Denise Gilchrist," was his official question. She gave a nod. He slammed a bundle of papers into her hand after slipping them out of his inside pocket. With a concise "you are served," he stepped back. He sniffed, sure that all of this would give him a cold. He unfolded his umbrella and strolled back to the street where his car had been parked. His leisurely stroll down the sidewalk was captured on camera, albeit it was not included in the edited version of the event. The materials that had been forced into Carrie's hands were still in her possession. She appeared as though she was no longer capable of being surprised. Her face was expressionless and dead. "Carrie," Ryan angrily said. She pivoted to face him. He said, "Don't bother going home. I hired a group of movers to pack everything in your closet, and the boxes will be transported to your parents' residence in an hour or two. The locks on all the doors were changed 20 minutes after you left the house this evening for your rendezvous with your friend. Carrie, I don't care where you go. My love for you is no longer alive. Once you're done with it, it won't come back. Don't call me, don't write me, don't try to get hold of me in any way, shape, form, or fashion. Understand?" he asked sternly. "I don't want to see you, I don't want to hear from you, I don't want to hear about you. You're trash and I should have kicked your butt out the first time you cheated on me. Just looking at you makes me want to throw up." For an instant, his mouth moved like though he was going to throw up. He tried to think of other things to say, but nothing came to him. His soon-to-be ex-wife sat motionless in her seat as he turned and left. The crew filming rushed to catch up. The cameras had lost sight of Sean and his wife for some reason. They didn't learn until much later that she had quickly got him into a taxi that she had called before leaving the club and driving him home. Up into the early hours of the morning, neighbors could hear Sharon scolding the man. A week later, when the producers dropped by to find out how things were going between them, she coerced Sean into signing a release so the show could utilize his picture. The producers harbored a slight suspicion that the individual was unaware of what he was doing. There was only one thing left to do: give his wife exactly what she desired each and every time. He signed where Sharon's finger pointed when she threw a ballpoint pen at him. Ryan went home and shaved his beard and mustache. They had fulfilled their duty. Another lawyer Ryan had recruited arrived to the bank the morning after the TV show was filmed, settling into one of the oversized easy chairs in the large, elegantly furnished room where the senior officials kept their offices. The bank president, John Harrison, questioned why Carlton J. London and his 3 law assistants were sitting there when he stepped in. Harrison was well aware of the lawyer's identity. Both of them belonged to the same San Antonio art collectives and nonprofits. London was among the best civil law lawyers in the state as well. At his ranch west of Abilene, he was slender and stylish, yet as tough as shoe leather when he rode in court. When Mr. Harrison learned that London was a representative of Mr. Ryan Gilchrist, a senior manager in Shawn Michaels' division and the husband of Mrs. Carey, he winced and his face turned pale. Mr. Gilchrist had sued the bank for not upholding its own morality clauses, which included several requirements. In his lawsuit, Mr. Gilchrist claimed that despite the morality clauses in both of their contracts, the bank knew about his wife's affair with a junior vice president, did nothing about it, and tried to hide it. He filed the claim under the common law tort of intentional infliction of mental distress. According to the lawsuit, this created an environment where Mr. Gilchrist's marriage suffered irreversible harm. After the preliminary proceedings concluded, Mr. London declared that he was looking forward to seeing Mr. Shawn Michaels' personal documents. The lawyer located the Human Resources Department supervisor and handed him the first of several subpoenas signed by a cordial judge this morning. The president convened with his senior management to ascertain the depth of their depravity. 20 minutes into the meeting, the HR director was called out. After a few minutes, pallid and shaking, he returned. A junior employee in his department happened to drop by during the meeting where the entire bank hierarchy was present and saw the subpoena on his supervisor's desk. The junior employee delivered the necessary records, not realizing that the legal department had not yet read the writ. Two of Mr. London's assistants then used the high-speed copier in the junior's own office to replicate every document in the file. While Mr. London was examining the originals in the small conference room, another of his subordinates had left the premises right away, taking the copies. Is there anyone who knows if the Director of Human Resources might gather some security guards and take the file out of Mr. London's hands? Was it all over just because he had a subpoena? Since the clones had already left the premises and were beyond of their control, what could they do? The bank president and the HR manager would not be looked at by anyone in the room. The executive with the lowest rank answered the phone in the corner before anything further could be done. He listened for a long while before informing the president that Mr. London had been mouthing some 4-letter words while looking over Mr. Michaels' personnel file and had not stopped. Mr. London is now requesting access to the bank's 2-year history of any harassment accusations. 3 tiers of the hierarchy simultaneously felt like puking their breakfasts. Ryan and Consuela had talked about using his personal video recordings to replace the family court encounter Ryan would have had with Carrie with the TV show. Then, they'd immediately concluded that not only would the busted episode achieve that goal, but it would very surely lead to an audit of Michael's whole supervision of the personal wealth division, given what she understood about the banking sector. Yes, it did. Consuela received a late-night call from an enthusiastic friend who was still employed at the bank, 1 week after Ryan's legal representative filed the lawsuit against the bank. Just before lunch, the building had been placed under virtual lockdown. It seemed that all of this stemmed from the topics covered in a frantic meeting that took place upstairs just after the major bosses arrived. An army of men and women, all dressed in opulent suits and toting heavy briefcases, had entered the bank at noon and vanished through the express elevators to the top floor. A second, smaller army of people in less expensive attire had shown there right before closing time. With stern eyes, this group looked about, and one of the tellers saw 2 of them show the guard their FBI credentials before he would let them in. They were closely followed by other individuals wearing badges that looked odd. Nobody appeared to be happy. Even the senior vice president who oversees the personal wealth and investment divisions was allegedly forced to be restrained when he attempted to open a window on the 22nd floor. Wow, that was probably just a rumor. Her companion questioned Consuela whether she could believe all of this. Thanking her girlfriend and pleading with her to get Belinda to bed, Consuela left. She quickly hung up and called Ryan's throwaway phone using the disposable cell phone to break the news. They talked about throwing away the prepaid cell phones, but ultimately agreed not to do so until one of them received proof that they were even suspected of communicating. The one remaining means of communication between them was too precious to lose. They were starting to value each other's voice more and more. However, they would restrict who could use cell phones. It was the wise course of action. Mr. Gilchrist. Yes, Ryan answered absently, not paying much attention to the 2 men who had wandered into his open office door. Rather, he was studying the quarterly inventory. Federal Bureau of Investigation Special Agents Thomas and Williams. Could we have a conversation with you? Agent taller than me inquired. Ryan said, You're in now, I reckon you might as well, finally raising his gaze to give them a grumpy frown. It wasn't that he was angry with the 2 agents, as they had assumed, but more that he was disappointed that they hadn't stopped by a few weeks earlier. He had never been good at waiting. The agents pushed their badges closer so he could see them, and he gestured with his free hand. Ryan snarled, No, I don't want to see your badges. I can get ones that look exactly like that at Walmart's toy department. Gentlemen, show me your ID cards. Few individuals requested for the difficult-to-reproduce identification. But the agents were required to create it upon request, which they did. The agents exchanged a somewhat astonished look. After giving them a quick look, Ryan picked up the office phone and, after consulting a phone book, found the number for the FBI office in the area. He then called the FBI and spoke briefly with the special agent in charge of the San Antonio office, who acknowledged that they had 2 agents who matched Ryan's description and who had those ID card numbers. Ryan then grunted, thanked the agent in charge, and hung up. His voice had become friendlier and his eyes and forehead had cleared. Okay, he replied, You're real. What can I do for you? Mr. Gilchrist, you've had reason to question the legitimacy of a federal officer. Ryan nodded and the elder agent asked. Some idiot came around wanting to speak with all of my employees about some anti-racketeering accusation, or something like that too. Maybe 2 years and 3 months ago. Ryan smiled at the agents. He flashed a badge around and had my boys wondering who Rico was. It came out that he was a union organizer who had traveled from somewhere, either New York or New Jersey. He planned to use some intimidation tactics, believing that if I was sufficiently terrified, I would allow the store to become unionized and so on. I believe he is still incarcerated in a federal facility. At his trial, I was required to testify. Ryan was starting to become irritated with the agent's propensity of looking at each other. He wondered if they even noticed it. Actually, they both believed that Gilchrist's file contained an item stating that he had actually participated in a sting operation several years prior, and that the special agent in charge of that operation had left many positive remarks about Gilchrist. So, who is currently engaging in racketeering? In an attempt to get things going, Ryan questioned. No, responded Special Agent Thomas. We're a part of a combined task force that is run by the Department of Justice and the Department of the Treasury. We are looking into reports that your wife worked at the bank where she allegedly laundered money in the past. Hey, Ryan gave an explosive snort. Have the boys finished laying the foundation? Damn it, don't look at each other. One of you just respond. He gave them a command that was final. Ryan shook his head and let out a loud sigh, and the two agents, startled, exchanged another quick glance before turning to face the man they were supposed to be interviewing. They both reddened a little. If you have looked into anything about me, you already know I'm not going to have a wife when the judge lifts the stay my so-called wife's attorney requested, Ryan said in a dejected manner. It is true, Mr. Gilchrist. We also possess additional knowledge. Although we are aware that the divorce is on hold while the criminal investigation is ongoing and possibly even until the trial is over, we believe you may have information that could help the investigation. Would you like to share any information with us? That came from Agent Thomas, along with a menacing expression meant to scare the guilty into making on-the-spot confessions. Ryan just gave them a bewildered frown, clearly not impressed. Gentlemen, I know how to spell bank, and I can write the words money and laundry on paper without getting too wounded, but that's about it. With all that's happening down there, how in the world can I help you? Now that the wife and I are out of the picture, shoot, I don't hear anything from there, he shouted angrily. When the agents exchanged another glance before speaking, Ryan groaned. He wasn't really impressed with the law enforcement officials' first visit regarding the bank theft. The FBI agents took a cup of hot, nearly bitter coffee from the urn in the corner and questioned Ryan for 15 more minutes without discovering anything of interest. They explored every possible avenue and received no indication from him that he had anything at all to tell them. What are your thoughts? As they were leaving, Agent Thomas questioned his companion. Williams retorted, I got nothing. Me neither, Thomas answered. Don't you think the guy's a little bit of a rube? I don't believe he is intelligent enough to be involved in this. Not at all. Stan Williams, who had been with the Bureau for 22 years, snapped back. I don't think that at all. Williams had seen a lot more individuals come and go than his junior partner. Gilchrist is quite intelligent. You'll see what I mean if we speak to him again if you watch his eyes. Despite his sharpness, he doesn't mind being underestimated by others. Gives him a benefit, Williams said. Agent Williams said, but I doubt he's involved in this. All he has is a BBA and 2 or 3 night courses in basic banking operations from years ago. How this guy might be involved, I don't see. My comment, Part 3 ending will come out tomorrow as well. Going to wrap up this story, see what OP does in the end. Sub and bell and see you in the ending.